So Chris, last year you released the book How Star Wars Conquer the Universe. How does it differentiate from all the other books available in the market revolving around the Star Wars movie?
So How Star Wars Conquered the Universe, amazingly, is the very first history of the whole Star Wars franchise, from its very beginnings to the sale to Disney. There's been no history book on Star Wars at all that covers anything like this breadth. That's because most of the books have been licensed by Lucasfilm, so they're very tightly controlled, and they usually just have the history of one movie. But this is everything: the history of the franchise, the fandom, the money it made, and its impact on the planet.
How do you explain the worldwide Star Wars fever?
I think Star Wars appeals equally to many people in different countries because every culture sees itself in the Rebel Alliance, and everyone sees their enemies as the Empire. Even though, George Lucas originally intended this to be a Vietnam story, where the Empire was the US military, still Americans went to see it and they saw the rebels are Americans, The British saw it and thought, oh, the rebels are Americans, Every culture around the planet sees themselves in this story. I think it has universal appeal. I think that the themes are universal. There is mythological depth, there is religious depth. You can believe in the Force to a certain extent on top of whatever religion you already have. So it's because it's completely divorced from our reality, but yes, also so powerful and so enjoyable and so much fun. I think that it's probably the one story that everyone around the world can appreciate equally.
And which aspects of the Star Wars series' success and victory do you think could be applied by companies in general?
Well, I think it's very important to remember that George Lucas did not expect Star Wars to be a success. He just thought it would be fun. He wanted to see it. He wanted it personally. Okay. He had already made his money with American Graffiti, which was his second movie. Made him a millionaire. And he was a big fan of Flash Gordon as a child, and he wanted to make his own Flash Gordon movie. So that's all it was. He thought that Star Wars would make maybe $12 million, the original movie. It has since made about $1 billion, so a little bit off. But it was just his idea, and he just wanted to see it through and do a big budget movie, and then be done. And I think the important thing to remember is that it was completely opposite from what all of his friends were telling him to do, from what the studios were suggesting that he do. It was, we think now, oh, blockbusters, it's obvious, it's the obvious thing to do. It was not the case in the 1970s. In the 1970s, everything was dark and gritty and serious, and everyone was telling George Lucas to make his serious movie, like Apocalypse Now, which he was going to make for a long time. So I think the lesson to be learned for all businesses, and indeed all creative people, is just stick to your guns, stick to your idea, no matter what focus groups tell you, what your company tells you, or other companies. If they're saying it's wrong, you probably have a good idea.
Lucasfilm, the studio founded by filmmaker George Lucas, was sold to Disney in 2012 for $4 billion. George Lucas received half cash and half stocks. Yes. However, this amount seems to be deflated, considering that the Star Wars series has collected more than $30 billion since its creation in 1977. Why is that so, Chris?
So the amount of money was based on where the Star Wars franchise was at that time. This was a time when we thought that Star Wars was dead. It was only announced with the Disney deal that they were going to make episodes 7, 8, and 9. So nobody knew if there was still any interest out there. And also, George Lucas was the sole shareholder of Lucasfilm, so it was just a negotiation with him. He was going to get all the money. And I don't think he really cared about the money. I think that he wanted it to be worth maybe as much as Marvel or maybe as much as Pixar, which is a company he started and then sold to Steve Jobs. But I don't think he really cared. It's just his retirement money. And the man is very wealthy. He is now actually worth $5 billion because his Disney stock has gone up. So the deal is now worth $5 billion to him.
Author Henry Jenkins defines the transmedia phenomenon as the flow of content through multiple media platforms. Could we state that Star Wars is the greatest transmedia phenomenon ever?
Yes, I would absolutely agree with that. The first thing to remember is that the novelization of the movie Star Wars came out in 1976, so 1 year before the movie came out. Science fiction fans were reading the novel, so they were getting excited about it. Then, they read the comic books in early 1977. So you already knew the story of the movie. Then you see the movie and you're just blown away by everything in it, but especially the music. It was a big part of Star Wars' success was John Williams' music. And so, that's sort of another medium, right? The soundtrack was very, very popular. Then there was like a disco version of the soundtrack because this was the 1970s when disco was very popular. That made a lot of money. And then there were more books, there were way more comic books, there was a newspaper comic strip. It was definitely a story that lent itself well to every medium, as we've seen since with video games, and tons of novels, hundreds of novels. So yeah, I think it is the perfect example of a transmedia franchise. And I cannot think of any other that has made as much money in so many media. James Bond is both a book and a movie, but that's it. Doesn't really lend itself well to anything else. But Star Wars, everything it touches turns to gold.
Do you believe Star Wars Episode 7 could attract a new public?
I think it already has. I think that the amount of excitement around the world for this movie has done the same already for it as for the original Star Wars, in that it is famous for being famous. So there are people who are going to come into the theatre who've never seen a Star Wars movie. There are people who are coming into the theatre, children coming in, who were too young to know any of the other Star Wars movies. And this is why they're calling it Star Wars The Force Awakens, not Star Wars Episode 7. It is Episode 7, but they are leaving that out of the marketing because they don't want people to think, oh, I haven't seen any of the other 6 movies, I can't see this. So, yes, the new audience for it is absolutely huge. I would say that Star Wars is the new Beatles. It's the equivalent of, how popular that group was and their music was, and how widely known they were, how people all over the world loved them. I think Star Wars has the same kind of fan base.